Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second presentation in the College of Engineering and University Alumni Association co-sponsored lecture series. And my name is Greg Miller. I'm the chair of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and it's kind of cool that all three lectures are faculty in my department. And some of you have heard me say this before, but when I'm forced to give a three-word summary of what goes on in our department that people might be interested in, it's earthquakes, transportation, and water. And so it's nice that there's basically perfect alignment between the topics in this lecture series and those three things. It's the trifecta, if you will. And so for those of you who came to the first lecture, it was on earthquakes. And tonight, it's going to be on transportation, broadly speaking. Now, for most of us, when you think transportation, you think sitting in traffic, why can't they figure this out, right? That's at least how I think of it. But that's only a small part of what transportation involves. And the other side of it is not just how we as people move around, it's also how do we move the stuff that enables us to do all the things that we need to do, whether industry needs large stuff or we need smaller stuff so we can go to the grocery store and get food. So freight is actually a huge part of the transportation picture. And I think what's interesting and what you'll hear in much more detail from Professor Goodchild is these things are coming together in ways they haven't historically, that the old school method of us getting in our cars or whatever, going to a shop and hauling stuff back is being at least balanced, if not overrun, by vehicles are just bringing stuff to our house, right? Or our offices or whatever. So I think that's a really interesting thing that's going on, and this will be a lot of what Professor Goodchild will be talking about. As I said, this is co-sponsored by College of Engineering, which is, of course, the University of Washington academic unit, but also the Alumni Association. And so if you're not already a member of the Alumni Association, or even if you are, you should check out their website to make sure you're aware of all the things that go with being an alumni. And I'm an alum, so I should go there. And I actually did before the talk just to make sure. It's a good site. Check it out. So that having been said, our speaker tonight is Professor Goodchild, a colleague of mine in the Department of Civil Environmental Engineering. And she's a freight expert, and she's actually the current chair of the freight group for the Transportation Research Board, also known as TRB. And if you are at all in the transportation world, you know what TRB is. It's an organization, but it's also an event that brings thousands of people to Washington, D.C. each year, and all these different groups look at different aspects of transportation, and of course, freight is a big one, and Professor Goodchild is the chair of that committee. So high national profile. And you may also have seen her in the news, although you might not have put two and two together, but really quite recently, they launched a new supply chain and transportation logistics program here on campus. And as part of that, there's this new urban freight center, and the story got picked up by the AP, so it went everywhere. So we're excited about that, and I'm always excited to hear Ann talk because she's doing really interesting things. She has really interesting ways of thinking about things, and I think we're all in for a treat. So that's a good job.
It's my great pleasure to present to you tonight. I have to give you credit for being here during the World Series, correct? Of course, we did not know that there were going to be 7 games in the World Series, but so you get credit for that. And I'm just feel privileged to be part of a group who is here because they're interested in what's going on at the University of Washington. You clearly have an interest in learning about subjects, and that's really at the heart of what we do at the University of Washington. We try to cultivate learning and share learning, and it's just a privilege to be invited to speak to you tonight about the work that I do here at the UW. So I'm speaking tonight about delivering goods in urban spaces. And the work that I'm speaking to really reflects collaborations and partnerships that I've had with other professors and folks in industry over many years. And that includes my group of students, some of whom are here tonight, who are a source of great ideas and enthusiasm and hard work. So what I'm speaking about really is not just my work, but reflects a community that has been collaborating around these ideas for a long time. So this is the current staff and students of the Supply Chain Transportation Logistics Center that I direct and that Greg mentioned. Our research focuses on the goods movement system, and in particular, the places where the public sector and the private sector have to come together to move goods. We have a largely privately supplied infrastructure in terms of moving vehicles, and we have a largely public sector provided infrastructure in terms of fixed assets. And so they have to work together and they have to collaborate in many ways, and there's a role for academic researchers to understand that system and provide insights into how we might operate that system better. The funding for the research that I'm speaking to has come from a variety of sources, but in particular the National Cooperative Freight Research Program, which is overseen by the Transportation Research Board, and also the University of Washington's federally funded University Transportation Center called PacTrans, which is housed here at the UW. We've had that center for 25, 30 years. So it's really been a source of good resources for researchers and students who've studied transportation engineering here at the UW. So why are we talking about urban spaces? Well, the population of the world is urbanizing. The UN projects that by 2050, about 64% of the developing world and 86% of the developed world will be urbanized. They will live in cities. The UN has also projected that by 2030, there will be an additional billion people living in cities. So in the next 14 years, we're going to add 1 billion people to the world's cities. As Greg mentioned, our job as civil engineers, well, he didn't put it this way, but our job as civil engineers is to make cities work. We build and manage and maintain civil infrastructure. So our work has never been so important. We provide shared transportation infrastructure, delivery of clean water domestically in an almost wasteless system, does not require plastic bottles. We manage wastewater, which supports health in cities. And we ensure safe infrastructure design and construction. So we engineer cities. We allow people to live close together in a reasonably sustainable way. My work focuses on the transportation system, and I'll speak tonight about sustainably moving goods in the urban transportation system. I've been conducting research on goods movement since I finished my undergrad degree. So goods movement is always what I've thought about. That's not always in the context of urban systems, but more recently it's become a very pressing challenge, and I'm sure you're aware of just mobility in an urban space is a very, very pressing challenge. So what does sustainable urban goods movement look like? How do we design and engineer for that? That is the subject of my work and the work that my students do here at the UW. So let's imagine the sustainable city of the future. Close your eyes. Try to imagine your view from the street. So it's a sustainable city. It's a place you live and you work. Are there trees? Is it quiet? How are people getting around? So you can open your eyes if they were closed in the first place. And we will look at what the internet thinks the sustainable city of the future looks like, because the internet has an opinion about this. So when you ask the internet to show you the sustainable city of the future, there are very consistent elements in the images. So I'm just going to show you a few images of sustainable city. There is dense residential development, reasonably dense residential development. There's some green space, because that's part of our image of good quality of life. We have some access to green space, and it's enjoyable. There is always a transportation system. So you can see here that we have pedestrian facilities. Right? These are very nice sidewalks. My street does not have a sidewalk like that. We have some passenger vehicles, not very many, and we have a transit system. In another image, we have alternative energy sources. Homes, we collectively, the people who've come up with these images, have thought about where people are going to sleep. There's a transit system, right? There's always a transit system. There's some green space. The sky is always blue. And it conjures up this image of calm and quiet. Some of them are a little bit more futuristic in terms of building design and new vehicle types. This isn't really something we have now. And some don't look that different from our current environment, or some parts of Seattle could look like this, right? But there is something very different about this image than the city of Seattle now. What's that? There's no traffic, okay? So if this was Seattle, there would be traffic, and there would be parked cars. Currently, Americans take an average of 4 trips a day. 87% of them in personal vehicles. The average American household owns 2.3 vehicles. So if there were 100 apartments here, that's 100 households, we would have 230 cars, according to the current model of vehicle ownership, that we would need to store nearby, right? And I don't see any parking lots. I don't see any storage facilities for cars in this image. So this image of the future city requires dramatically different travel patterns, dramatic shifts in how we travel. The current American travels 40 miles a day on average, and that's an impractical distance to expect the average person to walk or bike. And so somehow, if we expect people in the future city to do a lot more walking and a lot more biking, those trips are going to have to be shorter. So when we shop and when we eat out or we go to work in this future city, okay, we might go less far because that is less energy intensive, and that's a key element of our vision of the sustainable city. So this concept of the sustainable city, which is based on the idea that we travel less in personal vehicles, requires dense residential development, fewer personal cars, we don't have anywhere to put them, and fewer car trips. So what do our cities look like now? This is a little unfair because this is Manhattan, which is the most dense American city. But it's a lot less green, right? We don't have any green space. It doesn't convey the same sense of calm and quiet. There are lots of parked cars, and there's something else in this picture. There are trucks. So I don't know if you noticed, but in our vision of the sustainable city, there are no trucks. And I've looked at a lot of these pictures. I didn't just pick these 4. So this is Seattle. And again, we have parked cars, and we have trucks. Today, when we supply sidewalk cafes, restaurants, and shops with the things we want to buy from them, we use trucks. In fact, in the US, we do not have any meaningful infrastructure to deliver by any other mode. Trucks are the way we get goods to stores and restaurants, and they are the mechanism we have for removing waste, compost, recycled, frying oil. So if we want food in restaurants, we want wine in restaurants, we use trucks to deliver it. But our image of the sustainable city doesn't include goods movement or waste removal. Okay? And I'm puzzled as to why that's the case. Every image thinks about personal travel. It's one of the key things, right? Every one of these images has thought about how are people going to get around in the sustainable city. But none of them have presented us with an image for what sustainable goods movement looks like. And you might say, well, people don't like trucks. They're big and scary and noisy and unpleasant to be around, but so are buses. Right? And many of the vehicles that we're going to use to move people around are just as loud and just as noisy and just as intimidating as trucks. And in fact, if we want to design more walkable communities, we will require more dense stores and restaurants, right? We will have to bring these goods and services closer to you so that you can walk or bike or take transit to them. So we might imagine that the sustainable city actually relies more on goods movement than we do now, because that delivery system is going to do part of the work that you're not doing in your car. The final leg to your home, will be shorter because it needs to be, because it's not going to be driven. So the goods movement system sort of needs to penetrate, further into the city and bring goods closer to you. So we currently use trucks to do that. Our image of the sustainable city doesn't include that. So we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to think about and define what sustainable urban goods movement looks like. That's what we've been working on in our lab. So what is sustainable goods movement? Well, I would suggest that sustainable goods movement must be compatible with urban living. So it should support this idea of dense, walkable communities. It shouldn't be excessively noisy or excessively dangerous or excessively polluting. We would like for the activity to produce little to no greenhouse gas emissions and to not disrupt or delay other users on this system. So I liken sustainability research to safety research, because people seem comfortable with the concepts of safety research. So if you think about transportation safety, the city of Seattle has a program called Vision Zero, right? And they have a stated goal of having 0 fatalities or serious injuries in the city by 2030. And so far in 2016, there have been 106. So I'm very skeptical we will get to 0, but it's a target and it's a direction. So what we do is we study the current system. We look at the current infrastructure and how it's used and where incidents occur and what kind of equipment we use when we travel. And we look for cost-effective ways of improving from our starting point. So we're going to do the same thing with goods movement. We're going to study and understand the current system we have for distributing goods. We're going to evaluate how sustainable that is, and we're going to try to move to a more sustainable future. We're going to look for cost-effective solutions. So in the work that I will speak to today, we've looked at different goods movement strategies, and we focus on vehicle miles traveled, So how many miles of vehicle movements does it take to get all of our stuff into our tummies? CO2 emissions, and local pollutant emissions, particularly nitrous oxide and particulate matter. So there's other ways in which something is compatible with urban living. Noise, in particular, is one of those, but that's not something that in my work we've measured. So we've looked at VMT, CO2, particulate matter, and NOx emissions. To understand what's cost effective, we have to work closely with the companies that provide these services and incur those costs and those have knowledge of those cost structures. So I'll talk later about how we do that. So what are the current challenges? We said we wanted to look at sort of where the problem areas were now and try to see what we could do with them. So I'm going to focus on 3. There are more than this, but we'll talk about these 3. So congestion, emissions, and consumer demands. So one key problem is wasted time and fuel and wasted infrastructure, both moving infrastructure and fixed infrastructure, due to congestion. So this chart shows for the city of Seattle thousands of person hours of delay over the last 35 years. And you can see, so it's not just your imagination. Traffic has gotten a lot worse in Seattle. In fact, if you compare delay to, I think it's 1982, it's 5-fold what it was in 1982. And we know that urban populations are growing and will continue to grow. And we do not have an option of adding significant lane miles to the existing city of Seattle. It's hard to describe congestion as anything other than waste. Time is the mechanism we currently use to allocate this infrastructure. If you're willing to wait a very long time, you can travel whenever you want. But we could use a different mechanism, right? We could use price. But we use time. And we say, as long as you're willing to spend a lot of time at it, you can go whenever you want. Doesn't have to be the solution, but it is the solution we use now, and that incurs excessive emissions, excessive fuel consumption, and excessive personal and asset time. And congestion is really one of the key underlying factors for why our vision of the sustainable future city relies less on passenger travel. It's a really important mechanism for improving the sustainability of cities, is reducing the number of trips that are conducted in personal vehicles. The second problem is emissions. And the current truck fleet, so this data represents from 2009, over-the-road vehicles in our current fleet mix. So vehicles that currently drive on the road. And trucks are disproportionately polluting. So although trucks are only responsible for about 7 or 8% of vehicle miles traveled, they contribute roughly half of the NOx and PM10 pollution. Similarly, although we have 7 or 8% of the VMT, trucks contribute almost 25% of the carbon dioxide footprint from transport. Local pollutants have very significant health effects, including asthma and heart disease, and carbon dioxide emissions contribute to climate change. I don't know if it's so much a problem, but changing shopping patterns are certainly a complexity. And the goods movement system is changing dramatically due to changing shopping behavior. So almost 40% of personal trips are made for a shopping purpose. So it's a substantial part of how and why we travel. And the way we shop has changed forever. It's not a fad that's going to go away. It is, online shopping is something we will continue to do. In 2016 was the first year that for people who shop online, they spent more than half of those dollars online. So in total, online shopping is only about 15% of spend. But for people who shop, they're spending about half of that money online. Also, young people are the most likely to shop online, and they're using more mobile devices. So it's sort of increasingly available to shop online. So we expect that over time, the percent of shopping that happens online will continue to grow. And online shopping completely changes the last segment of the distribution system. It changes that little leg from something that you did, you got yourself to the store and bought the goods and brought them home again, to something that a delivery company does. Instead of you driving to the store, buying your goods, drive home, a delivery company is going to do that for you. And this is causing dramatic changes in inventory management for delivery companies. And it's a real challenge because there's one big company who is really leading the way in terms of online shopping. And then there's the rest of the retail community, which is scrambling to figure out what they're going to do about it. And one strategy is to try to integrate their physical stores and their online shop. So I don't know how many of you shop with REI, but there used to be, the REI online, and you could go and buy stuff, and that was sort of its own thing, and there was REI in the store. And they were started from a business perspective as very different entities. The goal now is really to integrate those. So when you go into the store, if they don't have a size you need, they'll look in their online inventory and send it to your house at no extra charge. So they're trying to integrate and find cost savings in integrating those, and it's called omni-channel. And for many companies, it's quite complicated. They're investing a lot of money in trying to do that and really aren't sure how they're going to make money doing so, but they feel like if they don't, they have no hope of surviving. So our first set of research questions really include just understanding the current system. So what's the impact of this shift in shopping behavior on vehicle miles traveled, on carbon dioxide emissions, on NOx and PM, when we replace personal shopping trips with these delivery services? So we've done a lot of work around grocery shopping. And so I'm going to speak to some examples from grocery shopping. Grocery shopping is something people do more regularly and with more sort of pattern and structure than other shopping. And getting food is a really important part of your daily life. The USDA has some data on shopping patterns and reports that 95% of US households use their personal vehicle to do grocery shopping. So this is when we go to the store to shop. We get there, 95% of us get there in a personal vehicle. Households are, on average, 3.8 miles from the grocery store that they choose to shop at. So it's about 4 miles there and back. And that's the current model for grocery shopping. I get in my 3,000 pounds of metal, maybe 2,000 pounds of metal. I drive it to the store. I collect some groceries. I put them in the big metal object, and I drive back home. Contrast this, okay, with a delivery service where you might make those orders online. They would be collected at the store, and then a truck would deliver to all of those homes in a single tour. So does the delivery company have an incentive to put as many home deliveries in a single truck as possible? Absolutely, right? They have every incentive to do that. This is a cost that they're spending. They want to utilize their infrastructure as much as possible. So if you think about vehicle miles traveled and you look at these pictures, right, there are only a couple of cases where this isn't obviously better in terms of vehicle miles traveled, right? The one is if there's one home. Right? If there's one home, then the picture on the left is the same as the picture on the right. If there are two homes and they're at opposite ends of a line, okay, then it's still the same case. Other than that, it's very hard to come up with situations where, from a VMT perspective, delivery isn't better. This is why we call this delivery service the bus for groceries. It's the same concept as transit, right? Not only would VMT be reduced, but also congestion, because we've taken what was 35 trips, because that's on average how many packages or grocery shipments you can put in a box truck, and we've converted that into one vehicle. So my lab group and I have developed a simulation system that models homes, stores, distribution centers, and warehouses in urban contexts with different network structures or road network structures, and examines the VMT, CO2, NOx, and PM implications of each. One other thing that our simulation captures is logistical efficiency. So in the two cases shown here, we have the same number of deliveries are being made. In the picture on the left, those homes are more spread out in the catchment, and in the picture on the right, they are clustered together. And you can see visually that means that the system on the left has more travel, because my customers are spread out. And the system on the left reflects two realities. One is you just don't have that many customers. And so you have no opportunity to sort of organize them and serve them with a single trip. The other is that you're very customer focused, and you allow the customer to tell you when you should make the delivery. And this, I shop a lot at Amazon Fresh. This is the case with them. That's their online grocery delivery service. I get to indicate when I would like the truck to come. The system on the right is either there's just so much demand, there's so many customers to visit in a small space that I can cluster them together, and we use multiple vehicles to serve them. The other is that it's not customer oriented. So something more like a CSA, community supported agriculture, where they'll just tell you your stuff will be here on Tuesday. It's not a choice you have, because that's when it's convenient for the logistics provider. So they're both models that exist, and it's important to understand the extent to which our results might be sensitive to these sort of different models. And we think of them as kind of the worst case and the best case in terms of logistical efficiency. So this chart shows some results from our simulations, from many simulations. The bars show the average, and then the lines show the range of outcomes. And so on the left, we have what's called random selection there, which is sort of bad logistics. And on the right, we have proximity assignment, which is this good logistics. And the two bars show the vehicle miles traveled for conducting these 35 deliveries with passenger travel or with the delivery service. So you can see that with bad logistics and with good logistics, it's overwhelmingly the case that the delivery service reduces vehicle miles traveled. In fact, I think it's 90% reduction in the proximity assignment. With the current vehicle fleet, right, goods delivery vehicles have a much higher emissions footprint than a passenger car. So the amount of CO2 I produce per mile is larger with the truck than with the car. So we don't have the same outcome when we look at carbon dioxide. So again, we've shown sort of bad and good logistics in the passenger and the delivery vehicle. And you can see for good logistics, it's still very clear that we have a smaller CO2 footprint from this delivery service. But there's some cases there on the bad logistics where they might be equal. On average, there's still almost a reduction of 50%. But there might be some cases where it's not an improvement in terms of CO2. So can delivery services accomplish last mile delivery with less VMT and less CO2? They absolutely can. We'll get to nitrous oxides and particulate matter in a minute. So if you're familiar with home delivery systems, you know that delivering from the same store that you shop at is not the only model. It's not the dominant model for home delivery services. Typically, if you don't own stores currently, for example, Amazon Fresh, who's a grocery delivery company who does not operate grocery stores, they deliver from a warehouse that is outside of the urban core to exploit cost efficiencies of land and sort of road access. So you'd be delivering from a warehouse to the homes instead of the example I've showed you where we deliver from that same grocery store. So we call that our warehouse-based model. The other model, which is common, is the model that an established grocer uses, like Safeway, where they do use their current stores because they already have that infrastructure and that inventory, and for them, opening a new facility is a substantial cost. But they use a subset of those stores as the origin of the delivery service. And so we call that the DOPT delivery model, depot delivery model. And the other question we've looked at is, what is the impact of land use on these results? So as you noticed with sort of good and bad logistics, density is a really key indicator of logistical efficiency. It's easier to be good when your customers are clustered together. And in urban areas, we have higher population density and expect that, even if the market share is different, we still have denser customer destinations. So the other difference between less dense areas is that in Seattle, the most dense areas are sort of historical areas which have a gridded street network. And newer communities tend to have a less well-connected network to distribute traffic better. That was the idea. So we tend to have sort of a branch and a trunk and branch network in more modern communities, which has a big impact on the extent to which you're able to route and find efficiencies for delivery companies. So we've looked at different kinds of communities in King County and looked at what the outcomes are for these different delivery services on VMT, CO2, NOx, and PM. So this is the warehouse delivery model. So we're using a single unit truck, like the green Amazon Fresh trucks, very similar to a UPS truck. And they deliver from a regional warehouse, which is farther out from the grocery store that you might shop at. But we compare it to you shopping at the grocery store. It's important in this kind of life cycle assessment to ensure you have the same boundaries. So we have to add a regional warehouse to this store-based model to make it comparable with the previous model. And here we have depots, which are a subset of the stores. We use a larger combination truck to serve those. And this is the example, say, for Safeway. They have a large warehouse that serves all of their Puget Sound stores, and they might deliver to those stores on a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly basis. And then we modeled the delivery from the store in a smaller truck. We compare both of these models to personal shopping, which means you drive yourself to your local store and back home again. But we include the distribution from the regional warehouse in that example as well. So to look at the impact of land use, we included a range of municipalities in King County. So we look at Seattle, Sammamish, and Black Diamond. Seattle is the most dense. Sammamish is representative of more modern neighborhoods. And Black Diamond is sort of the least dense community that is still considered part of the urban region. And we compare them here on the two key components that drive our outcomes. So one is address density. So that's how many addresses are there per square mile. So that's higher in Seattle, where we have apartments and smaller plots. And then road density, which is how many lane miles we have per square mile. And you'll see also that Seattle is quite high there because we have this gridded street network, which is different from the street network design in more modern communities. So this table presents the average results from simulating these logistics systems many times for our 3 locations and our 3 delivery models. So the color represents the delivery model. So let's start with vehicle miles traveled. And that's the average per delivery or per household. So with VMT, you can see the lowest is always this orange color. So the logistics strategy that provides the lowest VMT in all areas is local depot delivery. And the delivery, the logistics structure that provides the highest VMT in all 3 of those locations is passenger vehicles, which is probably what we expected given how strong the results were in that simple case. It's dramatically higher, if you see there in the VMT for Black Diamond and Sammamish compared to Seattle. So now let's look at local pollutants. So they're called local because exposure to them is important and has significant impacts at this proximity to the pollutant. So you'll see that the lowest for NOx and PM is always passenger vehicles. And our fleet of current delivery vehicles are disproportionately polluting. And even though, with the passenger model, we have to travel so many more miles, the emissions footprint for these local pollutants with current delivery vehicles is so much larger that the passenger vehicles sort of win, if you will. So if we look at carbon dioxide, the lowest CO2 strategy is different in every location. So depot delivery is the lowest in Sammamish. Warehouse delivery is the lowest in Black Diamond. And passenger vehicles are the lowest in Seattle. So with current over-the-road vehicles, with respect to CO2, our solution is very sensitive to assumptions of that logistical model, vehicle choice, road network. So it's not a slam dunk either way. So if we plot all of our locations again on these density measures, we have estimated the model that predicts where passenger vehicles would be better than delivery vehicles in terms of CO2 emissions. And you can see that, so up here above the line, passenger vehicles are better. They provide less CO2 for the same work. So you can see that Seattle is quite close to the line. And there are not very many communities up here. So overwhelmingly, it is the case that delivery services provide a lower CO2 footprint. This is really because the travel distances in Seattle for personal vehicles are so small, and there's a relatively long, highly polluting, because of that bigger truck, piece from the warehouse into the city. So what this suggests to me is that from a CO2 perspective, delivery services are not an obvious win. And they're sensitive to logistical design and equipment. And the other is that the fundamental reduction in travel is present. And we have a long way to go in terms of improving the vehicles that we use to do that delivery now. So our delivery service is sustainable. I think they offer an opportunity to reduce VMT and CO2 in the vast majority of places. However, with current engine technology, in all of those places, they increase local pollutants. Indirectly, however, they can support car-free living. So we can imagine a dense, sustainable future city where you commute by bike or by walking or by transit to work, where you use those modes to go to restaurants and shops, but you do the bulk of your buying online. Those shops may even be more like dressing rooms where you try something and then it's delivered to your home. And maybe that delivery happens when pedestrians aren't around. Maybe that happens very early in the morning or in the middle of the night. And to some extent, it's a public good to do that delivery service because it allows people to live, with respect to personal travel, in a car-free way. Goods could be received by a concierge or at a locker so that you didn't have to get up at 4 in the morning to receive them. There would be no need for parking structures to store 2.3 vehicles per household. There would not be as much need for on-street parking. We could get more capacity out of the infrastructure we already have. We could reduce congestion. So maybe it is somewhat invisible. Maybe all these people who had these visions of the future city knew this all already. So an important trend to consider and watch with delivery services is increasing customer expectations. Customers expect now free or highly discounted shipping options. I say free because it's not free. None of these companies do this work out of charity of any kind. So they will cover the costs. Whether it's shown to you as an explicit cost or not, you're paying for it. Customers expect simple and generous return policies. They'd like you to pay for that return shipping if you want the item returned. And customers expect the ability to track in real time the location of their purchase. And these expectations continue to mount and bleed into other areas of life. I am an Amazon Prime purchaser. I expect everything to come the next day. And 3 or 4 years ago, I was very willing to wait 4 or 5 days. And you can think you won't get greedy, but this is what's happening. And customers expect this now, and they will select the service that can provide this to them. So you remember that image of good logistics and bad logistics? Well, this definitely pushes us into the bad logistics, right? I gave that example of where you got to choose when your delivery came. Well, this is very extremely precise and fast-paced definition of that delivery time from the customer. So it's costly in many ways, but I'm going to show you that these service requirements are directly costly in terms of how far the vehicle has to travel. So let's say a delivery company promises you and 23 other people in your neighborhood delivery on Tuesday. So the delivery company is going to try to draw a tour that visits all these homes as efficiently as possible. They're going to try to travel the shortest distance because they're paying for this, and money they don't spend on this, they're going to take home. So it's probably not going to look like this, right? It's not going to snake through the neighborhood, but it's probably going to look like a multi-pointed star. And that's a vehicle routing problem that we have many great tools to solve. And so essentially, this driver is going to sort of take one path through this neighborhood in the day. Now imagine that instead, the company allowed you to choose if you would like morning delivery or you would like afternoon delivery. And we assume that the customers are randomly distributed throughout the region. Half of them choose morning and half of them choose afternoon. So what the delivery driver now has to do, right, is in the morning, he has to make essentially a tour of this region. And in the afternoon, he has to make a tour of this region. So he essentially has to travel around this space twice. And it increases the travel distance, straight up travel distance, by all else being equal, about 40%. So there's direct transportation costs, direct emissions and energy consumption costs of these service requirements. So this being customer-driven, adding constraints to this optimization problem only makes your solution worse. And as a logistics provider, you prefer to do what suits you. And these constraints only make it harder for you, more costly for you to do your business and produce more emissions. So the faster we want a package, the more unique the product is that we request, the less consolidation and therefore efficiency is possible. And at the extreme end of these demands from customers is essentially what we do now, but in reverse. right? You're just going to hire somebody to pick it up, drive it straight to your house, and go back to where they were empty, which is what we do now. But maybe, because it's so easy, and I don't experience the distress of sitting in traffic and the time wasted of sitting in traffic, I'll buy more things. And I'll get things from farther away because it's, I don't experience that cost the same way that I do when I travel myself. So with this sort of one-to-one model, then, if we're just bringing one package straight to your house, we often get asked the question of whether or not drone delivery is going to happen, and whether this would be a more sustainable form of delivery. So I'm imagining a small drone because we want this to be able to drop a package wherever it wants. It doesn't need a separate landing facility. It doesn't need a landing pad. So we're thinking about a small drone that can carry essentially one package. But again, there's no consolidation here. So we, again, are sort of back to this star distribution system where we have an origin, and then we have vehicles going out to their destination and returning empty. So from a VMT perspective, you guys could guess that this is a nightmare. And half of all of that flying is not moving goods. It's not doing sort of productive work. However, we've done some research. Our simulation system can do drones, and I was really surprised at how energy efficient drone delivery can be. So on the left, we just have an image of this network. It's a star network. There's a depot in the middle, and the drones all move out from there. And then here I've compared the truck miles to the drone miles. So you can't even really see the truck miles. They're so small. There's so much more travel from this kind of one-on-one delivery method. And this chart, but I said I was surprised at how energy efficient they were. So this chart is just an example of results where we look at, based on the number of deliveries and the size of that service area, and we do this for different payloads for drones, where does the drone win in terms of CO2, and where does the truck win from CO2? And actually, there's a surprising range. It's for shorter distances and less packages, drones can actually win in terms of CO2. And I was surprised. Now, the question of airspace management aside, the conclusion I draw from this is, how could drones really be energy efficient? It's because drones, all of the design that has gone into drones has been about weight reduction, so that we can actually produce a drone that can carry its battery and travel far enough with a payload. So all the materials, all of the engineering is about energy efficiency and weight reduction. That is not true with your average over-the-road truck. Nothing about that truck has been designed to be lightweight. And if we applied the same engineering effort to making lightweight, fuel-efficient trucks, this would dramatically change the picture. So I feel like it's a little bit of an unfair comparison. So our delivery service is part of a sustainable future. I very much believe that delivery services are a piece of sustainable goods movement. Fundamentally, delivery services are like transit and are about consolidating trips into a smaller number of vehicles, and that reduces the sort of footprint for each package, be that financial cost, carbon emissions, vehicle miles traveled. For current over-the-road vehicles, delivery would reduce VMT and CO2 in the vast majority of places. And when we convert our fleet to more fuel-efficient, cleaner burning engine technologies, which we must, we can also reduce local pollutants. So if we apply some amount of effort in terms of improving the environmental footprint of over-the-road trucks, we can dramatically improve the sustainability of delivery services. We could also consider delivery services sort of this public good, allowing for reductions in car dependence. And if you go back far enough, right, delivery services are how people got goods when they weren't car dependent. So But there's also a dystopian view, okay, where smartphone shopping, like right now, my phone is not in my pocket, it's unusual. I remember I need butter, pick out my phone, buy the butter. It's into the system and it's on its way when it can get there. An individual is sort of no longer suffering the cost of these shopping trips, buying individual items shipped directly to your door. At a minimum, that is equivalent to our current system of transportation. It's just different people driving. At worst, it's a great proliferation of trip making and a vast increase in terms of CO2 and VMT and other pollutants. The Internet of Things suggests we don't even need to interact in this system. There's a fridge that has a weight sensor and knows that your gallon of milk is empty, and it orders your milk for you already, and it shows up at your door. Amazon has little devices for your laundry room. You just put it on top of your washing machine. You touch it when you're running low on Tide, and Tide arrives at your door 2 days later, probably a day later. Alexa is a thing you just speak to it. Hey, Alexa, yeah, we need more milk. Okay? So even the concern is that we will purchase at this more individual basis, and that will increase trips. We don't even consolidate into a shopping list anymore, right? Because you are at least now kind of think of all the things you need and then go to the store in one trip. So ultimately, if Amazon is doing all of this work, they do have an interest in consolidating those shipments for you. And so maybe there's a mechanism for some consolidation. But we don't have a single provider of these delivery services. We don't necessarily want that. We have an open market and we have competition for delivery services. So how do we support this utopian view where we have consolidated, efficient shipments and car-free living, but still access to all the things that we want? One thing I know is that to help support that, to move in that direction, we have to work collaboratively with industry partners and the people that do this work every day. We don't imagine a solution here at the UW and then hope it works. On October 12th, we announced the opening of the Urban Freight Lab, which will do just that. So we have funding from UPS, Nordstrom, Costco, and Seattle DOT. We're working on relationships with many of the other companies in this space, but also in additional spaces. And we're going to have really a living lab. We will be physically out on the street, measuring the time for different pieces of the delivery system, asking for ideas from people who do this work every day, and trying to identify those low-cost solutions which work for the providers, which work for the city, and which help us create a sustainable delivery system for goods. I would like to thank the college for inviting me. Thanks, Greg, for the introduction, and thank you so much for your time and your patience. I would love to answer any questions that there are. I also have, if you'd rather send me an email, you're welcome to do so. This is the web address for our center, and all our contact information is there. So thank you.